Hello, everyone. Good day to you all, and welcome to this introduction to Pandemic Legacy. We're here with legendary designers Matt Leacock and Rob Daviau. Welcome, Matt and Rob.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Hello.
Now, before we get started, I want to let all the viewers know that this is a pre-recorded interview. We might have some folks available in the chat to answer some questions that you might have while we're talking, but just keep in mind that any questions that you ask in the chat will not be able to be answered by us in the past. The other thing I want to mention is that this is going to be a spoiler-free discussion. We might have some passing references to the setting and start of each of the three Pandemic Legacy games, but we won't be getting into any kind of deep specifics about story or mechanics or anything like that. And along with that, I have a request for other people in chat to also avoid mentioning anything that are spoilers. There's plenty of people who haven't experienced these games, and we want to make sure that they have that the full experience. So this is an introductory kind of feel for Pandemic and Legacy games in general, so let's start at the very, very beginning, as simple as possible. What is a Legacy game? What makes it different from a normal game?
You want me to take that, Matt?
Yeah, why don't you take that?
I've answered this before.
Godfather of Legacy. Yeah, this is one you take.
A legacy game is a game that, unlike most games, some of the actions that you do in the board game carry over to future versions in that game. So you might play the first game and you might make a decision to put card A or card B into your event deck. Card A goes in, card B doesn't go into your deck then or ever. So when you play the next game, card A is in there, card B is gone, whereas a different group might have picked card B and card A is gone. So you're making choices, you're doing things in the game and making choices that affect a little bit the rule set, the content, the characters, and the powers. And then along the way, there's also new content that you'll get at certain times, either decided by the designers or based on actions that you do. You know, open this packet when the first character dies or when you reach your destination, which will often introduce new choices, new materials, new rules. When you put these together, you can tell more of a narrative story than you would in a traditional board game. So it brings in a little role-playing game, a little video game, and you'll continue playing these games for 8, 10, 12, 15 games, whatever the designers want. And then at the end, usually that campaign is over. Some games at that point have stabilized and you can continue to play it without it changing. Other games are just done, right? Once you get to the end of the story, the game doesn't have a replayable version. So it's a combination of playing it and changing it and making it yours.
Got it. How do you feel that that differs from like a game that just has a campaign?
It's a little bit different from a campaign, at least originally when I came up with the idea for Risk Legacy. I came up with the idea 11, 12 years ago, that it was permanent in one way. It was tied to risk. Risk is very sort of, in your face and aggressive. And so doing something that felt permanent, putting stickers on boards, writing on things, ripping up cards, meant that if you got 4 games in and you said, I don't really like the choices I did, with a campaign game, you can just go back and start again, like keeping your finger in the page of a choose your own adventure book. And this literally is a one-way direction with permanent consequences. I remember pitching it to Hasbro and talking about getting a tattoo or playing poker for real money. Like, these are sort of moments that feel bigger because there's some sort of consequences, even perceived consequences, as opposed to, I didn't like that. Take that card out, do this. Let's go back a game. It's the one-way trip is what kind of makes it different.
Okay.
And also hiding information is not typical in previous campaign games. I think some of them have started recently doing it. You could look at the whole campaign and look ahead. This puts things in envelopes and behind doors and masks things so that you genuinely get surprised when you first discover them.
Got it. So we'll probably dwell with Rob a little bit. We'll get to you in a second, Matt. Don't worry. You'll have plenty to say. But Rob, you've kind of, in particular from Matt here, but you've been credited as the godfather of legacy games. Can you talk a little bit about how this came about? You talked about your pitching it to Hasbro, but where did the idea come from? What?
Yeah, I was at Hasbro, and we were at an offsite talking about Clue, if you're in the UK, Cluedo, and what we could do next. And there was it's been a while, and I've told the story both ways, and then now I don't remember the real story, and that just kind of makes it better. I know at some point I made a joke that said, I don't know why they keep inviting these people over to dinner. They keep murdering someone, implying that this is like every Sunday, this horrible Groundhog Day, this owner of the house gets killed. And I think that just kind of primed my brain, because later on we were doing a brainstorming exercise where we were trying to talk about assumptions that you have about a game, any game, not specific to Clue, like the game board goes face up on the table. The win conditions at the beginning. And this is a great thought starter to see which assumptions can be broken. Now, most of them can. If it's like the game board goes under the table to the bottom of the table, you're like, there's nothing there. And I remember saying something you do in one game does not affect the next game. As sort of like an assumption of a board game. And my boss at the time, who was a designer, was writing on the board, and he went, and just pointed the marker at me and then went back to writing. And between those two things, I immediately had this idea of what that would be. And I was very scared. I'm like, well, it can't be permanent. And I started working on it for Clue, and Steve Baker, my boss, and Craig Van Ness, both of whom have since left Hasbro, were kind of like, no, do it. And so I said, I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to be as punk rock as possible, even though I don't think it makes any sense. Spent some time doing it, pitched it as Clue. Hasbro was like, I don't know what this is. It was part of 8 ideas. And they're like, we don't want this. Or went on a back burner for 6 months. And then I dusted it off and said, I think this could work for Risk. And really sort of made it work there, where playtesters were really into it. And then did the pitch of my lifetime to get it into the line against all odds. And it came out in 2011.
Yeah. Matt, what was your introduction to legacy games?
Yeah, it was Risk Legacy. So we played that with my gaming group here. I've been playing with a group of people every week for 20 years now. Yeah, we pulled that out and played it week after week. And I was really taken by I think more than anything, just the emotional stakes involved with the permanence of changes. That's what really hooked me into it. I'm not a big fan of Risk at all, but it was the legacy aspect that kind of pulled me in.
Yeah, for a while, until Matt and I worked on Pandemic Legacy, I said my tombstone was going to say I liked it, but it's Risk.
Yeah. I mean, that I recall at the time was a pretty big part of it. Everybody was kind of blown away by this idea of permanent consequences and that one-way street. What was testing the thing like back then? How did you manage to develop that? What was that like?
Well, I had the wonderful resource, which I don't have now, of working in a game studio with 15 designers within shouting distance of me, plus marketing people and game fans. And so whenever I had to test something, I'd be like, who wants to play? So I just had playtest groups that were available, and there was a model shop and people who could make stickers. So I could iterate quickly and playtest pretty quickly. Then eventually I had to do external playtesting, and I ended up doing a lot of what Matt and I do with Pandemic, but on a cruder basis, which we just send them to external groups and get written feedback. And along the ways, one of the early playtesters, a guy named Chris Dupuis, had worked at Hasbro and had left, became, in a good way, obsessed with this, to the point where I just hired him as a developer, because he basically found every loophole and every problem. And there's still some, but basically it was a design mess, and kind of brought it into focus. And then he ended up using that to go get a job at Wizards of the Coast for 6 years. He's since moved on. So he kind of put it into focus and organized the playtest groups and kept track about all the loopholes. And he was local. We'd bring him into the office to talk through some problems. It's a different beast to test things. And one of the things that I relied on, there were 2 things I relied on. One, I thought this was never going to see the light of day, and it was going to be so crazy that I didn't stress about finding everything. And 2, I counted, because it's Risk and it's a competitive game, that people would self-police. If one person found a broken system, but they're playing in a 4-player game, then 3 people would sort of try to keep them in check so they wouldn't run away. I'm not sure that actually worked, but that was the design philosophy at the time, because it's kind of Risk. It's like, I'm not winning, Matt's winning, get him. Let's get him, and then we'll get each other, Justin, right? So I was kind of relying on that, and I really thought that this was going to come out and 4 people were going to like it. So I was just like, I'm just going to do anything here and see what happens.
So once it did come out, like, how did you feel about legacy games in general? Did you think that it would turn into this like genre unto itself?
Well, no, I didn't. I mean, at some level, I hoped it did. I said, wow, I think I did something cool. And if this is right, then people will make other games. And that feels really neat that I came like with a little subsystem, a little, like a collectible card game. But I didn't really believe it. And I ended up seeing the first review while I was on my honeymoon at an outdoor bar in Hawaii having a drink like as the sun was setting. And I was like, well, this is a perfect review, which was glowing to go with this perfect moment. Hasbro had announced a move at the time. So I was going to the office was relocating to Rhode Island, like 90 miles away. And I was only going to be able to do it for like a year. So I knew I was leaving. And the most I kind of hoped for at the time was maybe this does just well enough that when I leave, I can say, I'm the guy who did this. Can I pitch you a game? Or can I get some development work from you? Like, this is just really lucky that this is, coming together with my name on it at this time in my career. But I didn't think it would go much beyond that.
How about you, Matt? Like, as you were playing through it, did the designer gears start grinding in your head? Did you think, well, this is really cool, and maybe I could do something like this at some point? Or were you just playing Risk and
No, that's always going on when I'm playing games. I like to evaluate kind of what's going on mechanically and what the product looks like. And I mean, there's a lot of wacky things going on in that game, so it looked like a pretty fun toolbox to play with.
Yeah. All right, enough about other games. Well, let's talk about Pandemic a little bit. So we're fast forwarding to 2012, 13, 14?
2013. I had been out of Hasbro a year. I was working on a different legacy game, Seafall, which turned out to be a lot of work and wasn't received all that well. It was like Risk, but more so. When I found out that Matt Leacock was looking for me. But not like I owed him money. Right?
Yeah, the idea for the game, I think, came from a brainstorm, really, of just Pandemic. The product had been bought by a new publisher, and we were thinking of all the different ways that we could expand the brand, whether it would be a dice game or a card game or all these different kinds of things. So everything was on the table, and we brought up the idea of a Pandemic Legacy game, and I kind of laughed and I kind of dismissed it because it seemed like it would be a crazy amount of work. I was working at a startup at the time, and it just seemed like it would be too big to take on. But I kind of filed the idea away, and then a few months passed, and for some reason I just started kind of sketching out some ideas about what a Pandemic Legacy game might look like. And I didn't get very far. I filled up a couple pages of the notebook before I realized, wow, this could be so cool. And that's when I sought out Rob. It seemed like it'd be great to chat with him and see if he was interested in collaborating on something.
And meanwhile,
meanwhile, I'm at Gen Con, though, Matt Leacock's looking for him. And I remember thinking, ooh, maybe Pandemic Legacy. Gen Con was such a blur. This was a year. I had been out for a year. I'm still hustling for work and showing a few ideas I had worked at and pitching publishers that I went home and completely forgot about it for like almost a month. And then happened to be walking by my game collection and saw Pandemic and went, oh, right, Matt, I should reach out to him. Maybe he'll turn into a job. So I didn't have his email and had to find you on Twitter.
Is that how we got in touch?
Yeah, I said, hey, I heard you were looking for me. And then you're like, oh, yeah. And then we went to direct messaging, and then we get each other's emails. And then you asked if I wanted to do it. And I'm like, yeah, I do.
Yeah, he just wrote like, yes, like this giant type. It was a very short message. It was very affirming. So
yes,
great.
Yes, exclamation point, 180 point type.
Yeah.
Figured that would get my intentions clear.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. What then was the early days of the collaboration like? How did you determine what the story was going to be? How did you figure out what the mechanics, how to parcel them out?
It was a bit of fumbling around at first. I mean, we had to figure out how we're going to work together because we're in opposite coasts. So we got a video conferencing kind of a thing going, pretty regular meetings. And yeah, I mean, we had to kind of figure out a skeleton to begin with and understand, first of all, is this going to work for a cooperative game? Those are some of the bigger ones, like, what form does it take and how does it develop? And
wow, what does a game represent? Is it a week, a day, a month? How many games do we want them to play? Do you just keep playing a game until you win? Or do you just always move on, win or lose, or is there somewhere in the middle? The first game, Matt had kind of worked out. Like if you play January of season 1, Matt's kind of like, here's how I picture the first game. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then you had some ideas of what happened next. I mean, that part changed a little bit more, but some of the first act, the first 3 or 4 games, you had sort of worked out the beats, but we had to take a step back, figure out, how many?
Yeah. Right. What's the structure of it? So we came up with the whole idea of it taking place every year and each game being a month. And then some of the other nuts we had to crack was sort of like, well, how do you prevent someone from just, spiraling downward where they make some decisions, they don't turn out very well, they lose the game state gets worse, and you play again and it gets worse. And, we don't want people to spiral into some kind of dark hole. So we need to figure out how the game could adjust and adapt to the players.
Do you remember how that happened? That with the funding thing?
I don't know. It was a happy accident.
It was a happy accident. I was playtesting with friends, and they played January and they lost. And they're like, "Oh, we have to play it again." And you could see like we just did this. And they had this down moment, and I panicked because I don't want to lose my playtesters. The moment I go, yes, but
have some candy.
Your funding was increasing. You get 2 more event cards, and they're like, "Oh, that's amazing!" And I remember texting Matt like, "I think I just accidentally solved our problem by trying to make my friends feel better."
Right. And then you don't want it to be grindy, so we figured out how you could kind of move on, keep the plot moving forward. So, I mean, like so many things, it's just a matter of iteration, just experimenting on things. And sometimes the experiments work, and sometimes they don't work at all.
Yeah.
So I think we missed a very small trick here in just describing what is Pandemic Legacy? How does it work?
So it's a Pandemic Legacy Season 1 we'll start with, because they do come out in seasons. It starts out very much like regular Pandemic, if you played Pandemic. So you're trying to find cures for the diseases, and you either win or you lose after a session that's pretty close to a typical Pandemic game.
Fully cooperative.
But as you're playing it, fully cooperative. Yeah, very good race effects.
Yeah.
But as you're playing it, the game is evolving. So it'll keep throwing new things at you, and you need to adapt. And just when you feel like you've kind of figured it out, there'll be some new twists and turns coming your way. Mm-hmm. So that's the big difference. You start out with you can put all your existing Pandemic knowledge to work for you, but the story kind of evolves, and sort of the mechanisms that are associated with it as you play.
Yeah. It takes 1 game year, so 12 sessions, a January, a February, a March, and it's set roughly. The time isn't specified, but it's modern time, so 2015 if you want to pin it down. Only one of the 3 seasons has an actual year. But
that's right, yeah.
All we know is Season 2 takes place 71 years after Season 1, which takes place whenever you play it.
Yeah, so the full campaign will take somewhere between 12 and 24, depending on how well you do. It's typically around 16 to 18 games. 16 to
18. I mean, I think very few people would go above 20, because if you're
you're throwing it out the window.
You throw it out the window and write us an email, because the way it works, if you win the game,
we haven't done our job right.
Yeah, if you win a month, you just go to the next one. So if you win every one, which I know some people have done, you play 12 times, January through December.
Right. If you're a pro.
If you lose a month, you get one more shot to try to make good on it, and then you just move on to the next one. So if you lost every month twice, you would play 24 games, but you would not play 24 games, because you would get to about June and say, I hate this game. We've lost every single game we've played. Let's play something else.
Despite all the safety nets we built into the game.
There's further safety nets and ways to try to make sure this doesn't happen, but mathematically
fall off the
trapeze
possible. And fall into the lion cage, and
How much effort would you say it was to make this thing in comparison to some of your other projects?
We have estimated, well, first of all, we were starting from Pandemic.
Yeah.
So that's the hard part. One of the things, like when I've worked on some legacy games that aren't based on existing games, first you make a good game that people want to play. So that part was done here, which makes it nicer. Then the actual turning this into a 12-chapter campaign game was about the equivalent of designing 2 or 3 games.
Yeah, I was going to say 2 to 3 games. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
Right, and that's with an existing core game that was sort of already established. So
Right.
yeah, they're a bunch of work. I think the subsequent ones were even harder because well, and easier.
Well,
had the structure
we
figured out.
traded one problem for another. When we
Yeah.
started season 2, we said, okay, we know it's going to be months,
Mhm.
and we know how funding works. We might need to rename it. So we had already figured out the legacy systems, but now we wanted to make a different core engine that wasn't the default Pandemic. So our time in the startup went to figuring out game 1 or a prologue, as it is, not how does this structure work.
Yeah, I think we could have made the job easier on ourselves if we just kind of repeated season 1, but we didn't want to do that. We wanted to give people, a new product that they could explore and just, have so much fun with, because it was different than challenged some of their expectations and inverted so many things for them.
And that's the tricky part for us. Are there any other legacy series, or we do? I don't know if there are, but
there may be. But
there may be, and if so, I apologize that I can't think of one. But if we just did this Pandemic, and there's nothing, this isn't a criticism, Pandemic, and you do 3 legacy campaigns, you might be playing 50 games of Pandemic.
Yeah.
In today's age, a lot of people play a game 2 or 3 times and say, I get it. So we wanted to make sure every time you bought a new set that you were getting like a close cousin of the game you played before, but felt different, had different problems, different solutions, different pieces to fit together. So it didn't feel like one long game. It felt like 3 games that told one story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get all the advantages of like leveraging what you've learned like mechanically in the other games, so you can get up and running relatively soon, sort of how the Pandemic beats work, but it does feel like a different experience, and there's all sorts of new surprises in each one.
So without the sort of army of designers and playtest resources of Hasbro at your disposal, how was playtesting this?
Matt, show me the light. Please, Matt, illuminate everyone to your way.
We used a method that I've been kind of honing in previous projects, which was to use do a lot of remote playtesting with video. Part of the problem with testing one of these is that it's a long process, right? If you're going to play the game and you're going to play, say, the whole campaign, all 12 of them, it may take you figure an hour each game minimum, right? Because there's setting it up and tearing it down and so on. We can't generally expect people to just invite us into our home, into their homes where we can camp out and just watch them. So this method worked pretty well. We'd ship out a prototype, have people set it up using the rules in the box, play it, and videotape themselves while they're doing it. And then Rob and I would get the video from them and watch it and basically log all their behaviors and get lots of insights from that, and then incorporate that into the next round of development. One of the big insights, though, when you're doing one of these, is really just to start small, start with that first game, hone that, get that working really well, and test that, and then add on another game or 2, send that out, get feedback, then maybe add another 1 or 2 games, send that out, get feedback. So that has the advantage of like those early games get really, really refined, and so the onboarding experience is better.
Yeah. I have to say, by the 8th round of testing, like watching that January game for us, that's like we send it to 3 or 4 groups, 8 times. So it's like the 32nd time that I'm taking notes on game 1. And I'll be like, man, there's still a typo. How did we do this?
Yeah. You can always find something.
That proved wonderful. Before, with legacy games, I would try to approach them sometimes like you would do like a collectible card game, which is get a lot of quantitative data: who won, who lost, what was the score. And really, these are more experience driven, and you're never going to get enough people to play it to get quantitative data. And their quantitative data is hard. You're not going to see where people were confused about rules or where people felt like it went a long time. And that's why the video is so great. And it's particularly great for me because like I explained with my funding thing, I cannot help but be a host when someone's playing my game. It's a bad habit. And even if I'm in the room, I'm like, no, just check the rules again. And my body language, even if I'm being quiet, where they know that they're doing something wrong, or if they're like 3/4 of the way through and they're stuck and they seem miserable, I'll be like, well, let's just wrap this up. Move to the next one. So watching video keeps me from being my most, my worst enemy. I do sometimes have to pause it if they miss a rule, a group. and they're playing wrong, and I just know it's frustrating. I have to pause it and walk away because it's already happened like a week ago when I'm watching it, but I feel so bad. Thank you, playtester. I'm like, oh, they're about that. And I see the video like, oh, there's 45 minutes left. Oh, no, there shouldn't be 45 minutes left. And then I see them struggle and take notes, and it all fixes the game. But some people, and all playtesters or anyone who like tries to help with the project is a saint for, going through that so other people can have a better experience.
Yeah, it can be really painful watching things go off the rails. But you can get so much really good data. You can pause it and take good notes. It's really hard to do that when you're watching something live, or you'll have an idea and you want to jot it down. And if you're live and jotting down an idea, you miss maybe 5 minutes of what's going on. So I've really come to love the method. It's not for everything. It won't work, like you said, if you're trying to tune a deck building game. That may not be your best method, but for these types of experience games where the emotional journey is really important, it's a great way to get that kind of data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Our sometimes I just write notes to make Matt laugh. Like I'll just, yeah, you're just going to sit down and you grab coffee and water and you're like, I got 8 hours of watching video today. And that's on 1.75 speed. I've met playtesters before, and when they're talking to me, I'm like, you talk really slowly in real life, because I'm so used to watching them at that speed. And then at some point you're like, hey, new day, they changed their shirt. I like green shirt guy. He always has a green shirt, and then he becomes green shirt guy because I don't know their names in the gameplay and stuff. And then like, green shirt guy's on his phone. I'm like, he seems concerned. I hope everything's okay.
So with a little bit of background on this, because I'm asking a question about whether there was a moment for either of you where you realized this thing was cool. And I want to preface this for those of you watching who don't know that this pretty quickly skyrocketed to be the top game on Board Game Geek and was widely considered the best game of all time for a while. So it is considered very cool in general. But for the two of you, was there ever like a crystallizing moment of that?
It still hasn't hit me, to be fair. I honestly have to say that. Like, I worked in this office. It looked just like this for the most part when it came out, and we had already been 6 months into season 2, and I saw it climbing the rankings. And Matt and I would talk about season 2. We're like, where's this going to stop? Like, where's the trajectory? But it was sort of very distant and surreal. It's not like you're getting larger crowds at your concerts or something. Like, there's no immediate, very visceral feedback loop. So it still hits me. You say something like that, like it went to number 1 and it's cool. And I went, oh, that felt good. Like, even though it's been like 5 years. I don't know. I get moments where I sort of like stop and realize that I'll walk by the game and go, oh, yeah, that was pretty cool. I'm glad I did that. But it's not, I don't remember a single moment like that.
Yeah, for me, it was just sort of a gradual thing. Looking at the buzz kind of coming in and just watching the rankings rise on BDG, it was very exciting. I'm kind of embarrassed to say that I was just looking to see the trajectory of the ratings because it just seemed unreal. But you are distant. I mean, you're like Rob said, you're in your office and you're kind of separated from folks in this job. That's one of the reasons why I love going to, or did love going to cons, because you get that sense of community. But yeah, it was still a little surreal watching that happen.
Yeah, it's a long feedback loop as a designer. My doorbell might ring right up here because I see food delivery is coming to my door. So hopefully someone in my family can get it. If not, I'll give them 3, 2, 1. Matt, tell a story. I gotta go get the food. Sorry.
I'll tackle the next one. No problem.
I guess then I'll ask. Do you remember what the community response to the announcement was like?
Not really in a vivid detail. I just remember there was excitement because Risk Legacy was pretty well received. It was pretty dramatic, and to have those two kind of concepts come together, I think was pretty exciting for people. So it had some good buzz building up to it, and then the early reviews were really positive. So it was a fun thing to go through.
And so then I guess starting to build some buzz, starting to, some of the reviews were coming out. Everybody was getting pretty excited about it. At what point was it determined that it was going to be a trilogy?
I think it was before it was released, right, Rob? I mean, I remember seeing the cover comp that said season 1 on it and going, "Oh, I see. We're gonna have a couple more."
I remember I dropped off the prototype because the publisher was in Montreal or just outside Montreal at the time, and that's 4 or 5 hours away from me. And it was fall. I'm like, I'll just drive up. I haven't been to Montreal in a while, and just drop it off and answer questions and meet with people, because it is a complicated game. And at the time, it was very different. Now it's just a little different for a production team to do. And the owner of the company was like, "This is great. This is doing well. Get started on the next one." And I'm like, I just drove 6 hours. I thought this was like I'm done. And she was like, "No, this is going to be big. This is going to be like a season 1, and we'll just see how many seasons we can get out of this." And I'm like, "Oh, cool. I would, work for myself. So someone just gave me another job. This is fantastic."
Yeah, I think we're both very excited about it, but I don't remember like having a discussion where we agreed on it. It was sort of like, it's going to happen.
I know. It's like,
okay,
this is going to happen. Go get started. And I'm like, okay, I'm sure. Like, yeah, there was there wasn't a lot of buy-in. And that was in October, and we were in person next in April, 6 months later. This was still 6 months before season 1 came out, but the production was done, and we had like looked at files and everything was done there. And so we had enough time to be away from it. We're like, okay, let's start talking about season 2. And we started in April of 2015. And we're 6 months into it when the game came out, which we're both very grateful for, because then as the ratings went up, we're like, oh, well, thank goodness we're not starting today, because that would be daunting.
Yeah, a lot of pressure.
Yeah, so we don't miss it this time. We're going to shift into talking a little bit about season 2. Why don't you give a brief overview of what season 2 is and how it's different?
I can take a stab at that rather than go into details.
I mean, if you want me to do it, I could do it too. They're not here to hear me talk.
So season 2 takes place, I think it's 71 or 72 years in the future. 71 years after the end of season 1. And things have gone very badly for the world. Things have gone very dark, and a lot of the known world's kind of gone off the grid. And you begin the game as sort of like an everyman. It's told from your point of view. You learn about where the world is at from your position as just like a day laborer working on a haven in the middle of the ocean. And you have to kind of figure out what's happened to the world. Mechanically, it is a lot like Pandemic, only everything's kind of flipped upside down. So one of the design prompts we had was sort of like, what if we reversed everything? What if you had already lost at the beginning of the game? And that's sort of what it is. The game is over in a sense. Like everything's blacked out. You only see this little keyhole of the world, of the known world.
Yeah.
And so
most of the game board is blank. Right. You can see the coast of North America and the Mediterranean. And a little bit of South America. So you can see like much of the Atlantic Ocean with a couple of your havens and a few of the coastal cities. I think there's 12. Normally a Pandemic board has 48. And like, that's it. And the rest of the board is just fog of war.
Right. And so over the course of the game, you discover what's kind of happened. You expand the map and the known world, as it were. Another inversion is that in normal Pandemic games, the diseases are represented by cubes. So cubes are bad. In this game, we've inverted that so that the cubes are good. They represent supplies that you're bringing to the last bastions of humanity. So you need to bring supplies to places in order to prevent disease from occurring. I don't know. What else you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, it was the original game, as you said, we tried to turn some things around where we said the original one starts with a pandemic and the world is largely working, and your goal is to keep as much of it working as possible during a very bad year. This is, the world has now seen 71 bad years and it's almost done. And how can you just stop that final contraction and maybe go back to a fully functioning world of some sort? Like, can you reverse the process? So it goes in and then it comes back out the next one. If the first one is sort of a summer blockbuster action adventure, Captain America sort of movie. Maybe something with Chris Pratt. The second one is definitely more of a post-apocalyptic movie. Not quite Mad Max, but like civilization. There are still cities and there are still things going on, but there's a lot of stuff happening that you can't see, that you don't know what's happening in parts of the world, whether civilization is there or not there. I like season 2. I like the story. I like that. And there's no spoilers here. Players are encouraged and allowed to sort of explore the world sort of in a direction that makes sense to them. It's not completely open. There's some places that are very difficult, if not impossible, to get to like right away. But you can explore cities and continents sort of in an order of your choosing and at a depth of your choosing. And so some people might want to see the whole world, and some people will be like, we don't have time. Let's just look for the important parts. And it was kind of fun to write something that was 71 years in the future that's present tense, but then you have these papers that you find that backfill what happened between the end of 1 and 2, sort of out of order. So you're getting sort of flashbacks. You might find something that's from 33 years after the fall or 52 years after the fall. So I like the story that's in there.
Right, you're kind of piecing together the past as well as the future, and trying to, in the same way that you're trying to piece together the world as you're exploring it. We also kind of move the guardrails out a little bit, so you've got a greater feeling of autonomy as you're going through it. It's less on rails, and which I think allows you to. I mean, if you're extremely good at the game, you can achieve this level of mastery, but you also have to navigate that yourselves and really think about the entire campaign as you're playing as well. So it's I would play it second after you've played season 1, because you kind of learn how that works, and then this allows you to kind of take it even further.
Yeah, I love seeing the reactions to season 2, because some people didn't like that it wasn't quite as familiar as Pandemic and the guardrails went away, and some people found that very exhilarating, that they could sort of make the world themselves, and this was like a very different experience that felt more dangerous.
Yeah, it does feel more dangerous, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what was the overall reception to season 2? Both like announcement, especially with all that buildup of excitement of people's excitement for season 1.
Season 2 was much quieter, right? Like it came out, sold well, but didn't get like a lot of the interviews and articles. I think it wasn't as new. It's what happens when you have a sequel. People are like, oh, I like it. Some people liked it better. Some people liked it worse, but no one was sort of blindsided by it like they were with season 1. And so therefore there wasn't quite as much attention that I saw on it. It's still rated very well. It's still sold very well, but it seemed to just be I think a lot of people are like, this is a good follow-up. My expectations were high and they were met. Whereas I think the first people were like, what's the legacy? And then they played it and they're like, what? Right. And so their expectations, they had no expectations. So it completely surprised them. And in this case, it was more of meeting expectations, which is hard to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's hard to just blow the lid off twice in a row like that. It was something completely brand new, because in a certain sense, you can't without disappointing the people who have a certain expectation for what that first one was. So it's a difficult line to walk.
All right. So now we're on to 2017, I think it is. And there is something called Season 0. It's important to note that Season 0 is not out yet. It is forthcoming within the next month or 2 here. I believe currently October is most likely when. But when did you get started on Season 0?
Like November 2016, I think.
Right? Yeah, it was the day after the presidential election. I remember it very well.
Yeah. Take a drink.
Yep. Yeah, we knew it was going to be a trilogy. And sorry, I'm entering my golden light phase of my house here, so I'm going to keep adjusting to try to reduce the halo. We're about halfway through season 2, and we said, what? Okay, how many of these are we making? And we realized we had about 1 more in us, but we weren't going to be able to keep mining this without getting very repetitive and redundant past. So we said, what is the third one going to be? We called it Season 3, and we realized it should be a prequel. And so we did a real quick half-hour discussion on what some of the story and some of the mechanisms might be. No, I'm still glowing. And so when we sat down, we weren't going from a blank slate of what's next. We were talking about, how do we implement this? I'm going to fix it. Let Matt talk.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at season 2, it takes place way in the future, and it's post-apocalyptic. So it didn't seem like going in that direction was tenable. So, but the idea of a prequel and like figuring out sort of the backstory between of what a pandemic game is like was very exciting. So we just bounced a bunch of ideas around there. Eventually settled on this that Cold War theme that we came up with. I was like, oh, that's much better, Rob.
I'm just going to, as the earth turns, I got to turn with it until you'll just be looking out at my neighbor's house through the window. Look at my printer. It's now like a focus. All right.
So we're looking at this is another big shift in its setting and its genre and game mechanics. What made you want to go this way with it?
I'm trying to think exactly how we came up with the theme. I remember the theme was unlocking so many ideas, though, for the mechanism.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but I think we were talking about movie genres. Like, okay, we've done sort of action adventure, and we've done a post-apocalyptic. What else is in there? And we said, we're not going to go post-apocalyptic, so let's go in the past. And we were talking about 80s action adventure, like we did action adventure. And then we sort of went back to what if it was a spy movie or a mystery or a thriller. And then we were like, oh, how about the Cold War? And, we just talked at a very top level, like what if you were spies and you had aliases and, there's intrigue and mystery and stuff. And you're sort of unlocking a mystery rather than we ordered food from 2 places. Yeah. So here we go. And we are just like, oh, and it could be this and it could be this and it could be that. And we're like, okay, there's something here, right? We know it's going to change and we know it's going to be difficult to implement, but we weren't like, let's do Mean Streets of 1978 New York disco dance-off game, because I don't think we would have gotten very far. And that's not something we're going to do.
So as disappointing as it is not to have that in the game, what actually is? What are the cool new features of Season 0?
Do you want to take that one, or should I try?
No, you go.
All right. So, you begin Season 0 in 1962. You're freshly recruited into the CIA as you were just formerly medical students. The CIA figures that, because there's this threat of a Soviet bioweapon. So the CIA has recruited you thinking it's easier to train medical professionals to be spies and spies to become medical professionals. So your job is to kind of figure out what's going on. This bioweapon might threaten humanity, so you need to figure out what's up. So that's the story. Mechanically, obviously, at 62, the disease is not. There's no disease in the world, right? No epidemics or pandemics happening. Just the threat of them. Your threat instead is Soviet agents that are running around trying to prevent you from doing your job and trying to blow your cover and so on. So you need to kind of keep the world in check, dealing with these Soviet agents while buying enough time to complete certain objectives. And every month, the games are months again, you have a different set of objectives. And those objectives, when you complete them, give you more information. So you can kind of piece together what's going on in the world. So a lot of new things in the game. When you're melding your cards, you're not trying to cure a disease. Instead, you're building a covert team that will then help you accomplish your objectives. And those teams actually can travel around the board doing your bidding. And we just unlocked all sorts of different things with them. Different ways they can travel, different ways they can accomplish objectives, and they help you kind of keep the Soviet agents in the world kind of in check as you're playing.
So I'm laughing at.
I know I'm glowing again. I can put my hand up now and make it a superpower. You dare doubt me? All right, I'll just keep going. The world is going to keep turning, so we're just going to live with it. I'm not usually in my office in this time of day doing it.
It's usually me baking under my skylight, so it's a nice change.
Yeah. What else? Talk about the passports very briefly, because those are cool.
Let me do it.
Yeah, you
before I
begin
do-
the game.
you got it. Before
all
I'm
right.
bathed in light again. Passports are you have different aliases in the game, and this is again no spoilers. You learn about it when you're reading the rule book. You don't learn all the details until you start playing. But in the other seasons of Pandemic, they have just different characters on the bench. So you can play the medic one time, and then you're like, oh, I don't think it'll fit this time, so I'm going to take the dispatcher, and you can mix and match your characters. This, you actually create different aliases and different books in your passport. So like you can actually play multiple characters within the same game by switching pages on your passport. And it's not at the beginning. We sort of ease you into it so that you don't get overwhelmed by playing 3 characters at once. But Z-Man did a great job with like actually making them look like cool little passports. And there's this color form fun where you get a little figure, drawing a figure who's like has sort of genderless and doesn't have any hair, and then you get a whole bunch of stickers to give them wigs and mustaches and beards and disguises, and we did that as a throwaway in the prototype, and people just fell in love with it, and we're like, okay, we have our first good idea.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So we're coming pretty close to the end of our time here, and before Rob gets swallowed by the sun, we should.
Now it's just in view, right?
And now the sun will be joining us for the remainder of our conversation.
Here, I'll just act natural. No.
So, I guess just a couple last ones. What order do you, if somebody's going to play all of them, what order do you recommend them in?
I can take a shot at that. I think if you're fairly new to Pandemic, haven't played a whole lot of Pandemic, I think you should definitely start with Season 1. And then you can go on to Season 2 or Season 0. If you played a lot of Pandemic and are looking for like the ultimate legacy experience, you might want to start with Season 0, because you can dive right into a deep story right away. They're designed so that you can play them in the order.
Yeah, I don't recommend.
One is simplest, or it's closest to regular Pandemic. So if you need to kind of get your feet under you, that would be a good one to start with.
The only one I tell people is I wouldn't start with 2, because it's just at the end narratively. It's either in the middle or the end narratively. Like either one of those doesn't make sense. Like if you play them in the order they came out, 1's first. If you play them in the order they're set, 0's first. Both of those to me make sense of starting with 0 or 1, and then after that you can decide how you want to bounce around in time, and they'll all work. I think it would be the least satisfying story and looking at the mechanisms to start with 2 and go backwards. But someone's going to do it and love it, but that's not my recommendation.
All right. When you getting started on the next one?
We're not. That's easy.
Yeah. We were able to get 0 across the line knowing that this was the last one.
Yeah, no, the first one took about 13 months. The second one took about 16 months. Now, we knew we had more time because we were getting ahead of the release date, but Season 0 took 3 years because we're like, we've done that, right? Like we were basically wanting to make a new, fresh, different game that tied up things in the story and gave you a new direction, like a new mechanisms to play with. I couldn't even imagine sitting down right now and finding anything interesting to say or design in this series. I'm happy to work with Matt again, and I say that publicly, so he's forced to work with me. I just won't be another game in this series.
Yeah, I mean, maybe ask us in 5 years, then we'll probably tell you take a hike.
Yeah, it'll be a softer no. Like, I don't think so.
All right. Well, with all this time, years and years and years spent, especially for you, Rob, but also for you, Matt, do you still see a lot of like potential ground in the legacy genre? Or
yeah, definitely.
People are still making them. I'm working on a couple. I think the newness is gone, as anything is the case, but someone will mash it up with something else or do something. They just take a long time to make. I think there were a lot that were started sometime between Risk and Pandemic Legacy or just after, but then a lot of people got into it and said, this is a lot of work. and then stopped.
Yeah, I think we've learned what kind of works and what doesn't, and we're just sort of establishing some design patterns that makes development easier, and you're less likely to go down a blind alley. So I'm looking forward to seeing what other kind of breakthroughs people have when they're experimenting in this space.
Cool. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much to the both of you for taking the time to chat. And before we sign off, any last thoughts, any shout-outs you want to make, anything you want to declare at all?
I'll just thank everybody who play tested this.
By going through customs?
No, probably not.
No, probably not anytime soon. I would like to thank playtesters and all the people who have said something. I said before, like it was not immediate reaction to how well this went, but the reactions and the best part are when people come up and talk about when they played it or they ask questions, or, I see people on Twitter who have shadow boxed some of their sets.
Oh, yeah.
Or have, I've seen tattoos and cosplay around some of the games. And when I see that blows me away. So thank you for all the people who took the time to play or play test and, enjoyed the game.
Yeah, likewise.
All right.
Means a lot.
Well, we will let the sun continue to devour Rob.
Yeah, it's super professional hour. I have food delivered, and then I have to put myself in the corner and hold something up to block the sun. Like, hey, people, someday you'll be a pro like me.
Oh, I suppose any advice for aspiring designers? That's always a classic question.
Put your blinds down before you start a podcast. What I tell people is, I briefly taught game design at a couple schools. If you really haven't started at all, don't start with a legacy game. But basically just take a game you like and start modding it. Do expansions. Do, mashups. Then take 2 games you like and say, what happens if I put these together? What's the best stuff? You don't have to start with a blank piece of paper.
Right.
Right. If you're doing a lot of crafts and things like that, I mean, if you're going to become a cook, you don't start I'm opening a restaurant. You go work at a restaurant. You see what other people do. You learn from other people. And the way to do that is more isolating, is just to start from something that isn't blank. And I think you'll get a lot less frustrated. And then you can have more success when you start working on your own ideas.
Yeah.
I would say start simple and get your ideas on the table as soon as possible. Don't build some beautiful thing in your notebook and then, because ultimately, you're going to be really disappointed the first time it gets on the table. It's better to have something simple that you can get up and crashing as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And involve other people in the process as much as you can. So, and not just your family.
Yeah, and every game sucks until it doesn't. I mean,
Right.
What Matt and I will do is we'll say, let's make a mess, and then we'll make something well, let's go try it and see what's bad. And then it's bad, and it still sucks.
Yeah.
Oh, man, we spend so much time, and then we go, well, we dug ourselves out of this ditch before. Let's do it again.
Yeah, it's a process of making things suck less is generally how it works.
Yep.
All right. Thank you again, Matt and Rob, and everybody else out there. Thanks for
Thank you.
watching.
Hopefully I'm in the chat laughing at myself right now.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rafael Bocamazzo, better known as Dr. B. I'm the clinical director of Take This, the first mental health nonprofit to serve the game community. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at TakeThisOrg. Well, our mission is to educate people on mental health topics, and that's what we're here to do today. We're going to talk about burnout, especially in creative professions. Now, we hear the term burnout all the time, but what is it? We hear about people working too hard and it leads to burnout, so they're exhausted, right? Well, burnout is more than that. If burnout was just about overwork, we could take a vacation and fix it. Yes, exhaustion from overwork is a big part of burnout, but the second part is a sense of ineffectiveness. You're not just overworked. You don't feel like you can do anything about it. You don't feel like you can hit your goals. You don't feel like you can, do really anything right in your job. More than that, there's a sense of cynicism that goes along with burnout. You just don't care anymore. You're not just overworked and don't think you can do anything about it. You don't care about your goals. You don't care about your fans. You don't care about even maybe why you started doing what you do in the first place. Nothing matters anymore. These three things together combine to create a chronic psychological condition that we know as burnout. But what do we do about it? Well, some common strategies are to one, take breaks. We have this myth, especially in creative fields, that if you're not constantly working, you're not going to make it or you're, going to lose your position. But the truth is, taking breaks actually makes your work better. The research is pretty clear on this one that taking breaks allows you to work more effectively. Another one, especially for those of us who are working at home, creating a sense of work-home separation. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Maybe it's only working during certain set hours. Maybe it's not answering emails outside those hours. Maybe it's having a separate workspace. I don't know. Try it out. Get creative for you. Figure out what works for you. A third thing, especially if you are doing what you love for a job, is having new things to do outside of work that have nothing to do with your job. For me, that's cooking. I love to cook, and it has nothing to do with video games, tabletop games, or mental health. I love it. Creating measurable goals can be an effective way of fighting that sense of inefficacy. Maybe you pick 3 things to do that day, and if you can hit those 3 things, everything else is just gravy. Maybe you create weekly goals. I don't know. Again, figure out what works for you. But finally, aligning your goals and your job with your values can help fight that sense of cynicism. If you're doing something that you're morally not aligned with, that can be a really hard thing to do. So change your content to meet what's important to you. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to check out takethis.org for more mental health information, and please enjoy the rest of PAX, everybody.
Experience the essence of role-playing by being a game detective in a cyberpunk world.
Hello, my name is Krzysztof Wojdyła and I am a PR specialist at Unsure Studios. I would love to share more details about our game, Game Deck. Game Deck is a single-player, non-combat, cyberpunk isometric RPG based on a book series under the same name, written by Marcin Przybyłek. As a private detective, Game Deck, players are solving crimes committed inside virtual worlds. Every decision player makes will have consequences, alter the character traits, and impact the game's course. We are currently knee-deep in production, and a lot can change before the game's release. We are using Unreal Engine 4, and the scheduled release window is Q4 2020. We've recently announced the Nintendo Switch version of the game coming in 2021. Game Deck emulates the nature of tabletop RPG by focusing on multiple, choice-dependent character-building scenarios. The game adapts to the player playstyle. We want to celebrate the creativity and individuality of our players and offer them as many options for each quest as possible, as well as use those in-game decisions to engineer the character of the player's avatar. Let's take a quick look at the game setting. Once again, our primary reference is a Game Deck verse, the world created by Marcin Przybyłek, in Warsaw City, the 22nd century. The world's natural environment has mutated and become hostile to humanity, and humans are forced to live in the cities fortified from an aggressive ecosystem outside. But in the fight for resources, the trapped population is divided into the haves or have-nots. Many chose to escape into Virtualia, virtual games that enable them to forget the world's horrors and fulfill their fantasies, however dark they may be. The idea of virtual worlds in Game Deck allows us to create various settings for our cases. For example, players will explore the recreation of the Wild West farm stylized as a free-to-play game called Harvest Time, or a dark and kinky world filled with intrigues and not entirely appropriate activities, twisted and perverted. Thanks to our successful Kickstarter campaign, we will add the world based on a 7 The Days Long Gone game made by Fool's Theory and IGN Pro, or a Cthulhu Virtualium based on Lovecraft's novels. So, how the gameplay look like? As you can see in the video, the player gets a case to solve and heads to virtual reality using couches. Inside the game, the player needs to interact with NPCs and other player characters to interrogate them and gather information. Exploration is a huge part of Game Deck. Clues can be found anywhere in the game world. Access to a dialogue option depends on the player's previous choices and acquired knowledge. The Codex is a holistic map that links NPCs, companies, locations, and other case-relevant objects. It contains a deduction field mechanic where a player can unscramble facts and evidence to conclude a case. An essential part of a deduction in Game Deck is the absence of a fail state. Instead, case revelations present moral dilemmas. Players can base their conclusions on personal ethics, lawful integrity, or a sense of poetic justice. A game deck will remain neutral to their choice. However, the character within it will respond to the player decisions according to their own ethical and personal beliefs. The character will be crafted through a series of questions at the beginning of the game. It will allow the game to choose the most relevant aspects and backgrounds for a character. Those will have an influence on the early steps of your investigations but are not set in stone. Players will be able to choose their own playstyle and further define the detective using aspects and professions. It's entirely up to you how the story will unfold. Remember, you are the sum of your choices.
What do you think it's like here?
Hi, everybody. I'm Rafael Bocamazzo, better known as Dr. B. I'm the clinical director of Take This, the first mental health nonprofit to serve the game community. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at TakeThisOrg. Well, our mission is to educate people on mental health topics, and that's what we're here to do today. We're going to talk about burnout, especially in creative professions. Now, we hear the term burnout all the time, but what is it? We hear about people working too hard and it leads to burnout, so they're exhausted, right? Well, burnout is more than that. If burnout was just about overwork, we could take a vacation and fix it. Yes, exhaustion from overwork is a big part of burnout, but the second part is a sense of ineffectiveness. You're not just overworked. You don't feel like you can do anything about it. You don't feel like you can hit your goals. You don't feel like you can, do really anything right in your job. More than that, there's a sense of cynicism that goes along with burnout. You just don't care anymore. You're not just overworked and don't think you can do anything about it. You don't care about your goals. You don't care about your fans. You don't care about even maybe why you started doing what you do in the first place. Nothing matters anymore. These three things together combine to create a chronic psychological condition that we know as burnout. But what do we do about it? Well, some common strategies are to one, take breaks. We have this myth, especially in creative fields, that if you're not constantly working, you're not going to make it or you're, going to lose your position. But the truth is, taking breaks actually makes your work better. The research is pretty clear on this one that taking breaks allows you to work more effectively. Another one, especially for those of us who are working at home, creating a sense of work-home separation. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Maybe it's only working during certain set hours. Maybe it's not answering emails outside those hours. Maybe it's having a separate workspace. I don't know. Try it out. Get creative for you. Figure out what works for you. A third thing, especially if you are doing what you love for a job, is having new things to do outside of work that have nothing to do with your job. For me, that's cooking. I love to cook, and it has nothing to do with video games, tabletop games, or mental health. I love it. Creating measurable goals can be an effective way of fighting that sense of inefficacy. Maybe you pick 3 things to do that day, and if you can hit those 3 things, everything else is just gravy. Maybe you create weekly goals. I don't know. Again, figure out what works for you. But finally, aligning your goals and your job with your values can help fight that sense of cynicism. If you're doing something that you're morally not aligned with, that can be a really hard thing to do. So change your content to meet what's important to you. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to check out takethis.org for more mental health information, and please enjoy the rest of PAX, everybody.
Experience the essence of role-playing by being a game detective in a cyberpunk world.
Hello, my name is Krzysztof Wojdyła and I am a PR specialist at Unsure Studios. I would love to share more details about our game, GameDeck. GameDeck is a single-player, non-combat, cyberpunk isometric RPG based on a book series under the same name, written by Marcin Przybyłek. As a private detective, GameDeck, players are solving crimes committed inside virtual worlds. Every decision player makes will have consequences, alter the character traits, and impact the game's course. We are currently knee-deep in production, and a lot can change before the game's release. We are using Unreal Engine 4, and the scheduled release window is Q4 2020. We've recently announced the Nintendo Switch version of the game coming in 2021. GameDeck emulates the nature of tabletop RPG by focusing on multiple, choice-dependent character-building scenarios. The game adapts to the player playstyle. We want to celebrate the creativity and individuality of our players and offer them as many options for each quest as possible, as well as use those in-game decisions to engineer the character of the player's avatar. Let's take a quick look at the game setting. Once again, our primary reference is a GameDeck verse, the world created by Marcin Przybyłek, in Warsaw City, the 22nd century. The world's natural environment has mutated and become hostile to humanity, and humans are forced to live in the cities fortified from an aggressive ecosystem outside. But in the fight for resources, the trapped population is divided into the haves or have-nots. Many chose to escape into Virtualia, virtual games that enable them to forget the world's horrors and fulfill their fantasies, however dark they may be. The idea of virtual worlds in GameDeck allows us to create various settings for our cases. For example, players will explore the recreation of the Wild West farm stylized as a free-to-play game called Harvest Time, or a dark and kinky world filled with intrigues and not entirely appropriate activities, twisted and perverted. Thanks to our successful Kickstarter campaign, we will add the world based on a 7 The Days Long Gone game made by Fool's Theory and AMGN Pro, or a Cthulhu Virtualium based on Lovecraft's novels. So, how the gameplay look like? As you can see in the video, the player gets a case to solve and heads to virtual reality using couches. Inside the game, the player needs to interact with NPCs and other player characters to interrogate them and gather information. Exploration is a huge part of GameDeck. Clues can be found anywhere in the game world. Access to a dialogue option depends on the player's previous choices and acquired knowledge. The Codex is a holistic map that links NPCs, companies, locations, and other case-relevant objects. It contains a deduction field mechanic where a player can unscramble facts and evidence to conclude a case. An essential part of a deduction in GameDeck is the absence of a fail state. Instead, case revelations present moral dilemmas. Players can base their conclusions on personal ethics, lawful integrity, or a sense of poetic justice. A GameDeck will remain neutral to their choice. However, the character within it will respond to the player decisions according to their own ethical and personal beliefs. The character will be crafted through a series of questions at the beginning of the game. It will allow the game to choose the most relevant aspects and backgrounds for a character. Those will have an influence on the early steps of your investigations but are not set in stone. Players will be able to choose their own playstyle and further define the detective using aspects and professions. It's entirely up to you how the story will unfold. Remember, you are the sum of your choices.
Hi, everybody at PAX. Hello from the past. It is now, was it the 21st of August, and we're recording this. everybody at PAX. Hello from the past. It is now, was it the 21st of August, and we're recording this for the future. Welcome to the Sexy or Silly panel, the Great Video Game Sex Scene Debate, the panel in which we, your panelists, have picked a bunch of video game sex scenes and are going to rip them to shreds or cheer about them for your viewing pleasure. So first, I'd love to introduce the panelists. We've got a great set today. So Toya, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Hello, I am Toya Kristen Finley. I am a writer and editor in general. In video games, I'm a game designer, narrative designer, game writer, editor, and diversity consultant. I have worked on everything from AAA to indies. I co-authored the Game Narrative Toolbox, and I edited and contributed to Narrative Tactics for Mobile and Social Games, Pocket-Sized Storytelling. I am also on the executive board of the IGDA Game Writing Special Interest Groups. And by the way, I'm the super ace member of the panel who is neither turned on or off by sex scenes, but I sure will give you my opinions of them.
Perfect. All right, Zuza.
All right. Hi, everybody. So yes, my name is Julia James, and I'm a trade commissioner for video games and esports with the Consulate General of Finland in LA by day, but by night. I'm the founder of Dreamatic, which is an early stage game startup working on cool new experiences for the FEM audience related to the subject matter of the day. And in addition to that, I'm also the co-vice chair of the Romance and Sexuality in Games Special Interest Group of IGDA.
Awesome. All right, Sharang, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm Sharang Biswas. I'm a game designer, writer, and artist with a particular focus on analog games and playable installations and that sort of thing. I'm also at the faculty of Bard and what else do I teach? Fordham. And relevant to this, I was the co-editor of Honey and Hot Wax, an anthology of erotic art games that just released from Pelgrane Press, which is a collection of LARPs and tabletop role-playing games about sex from a diverse team of 9 game designers. And I'm going to be the co-editor of Strange Lusts, Strange Loves, an anthology of erotic interactive fiction, which is going to be a special issue of the Strange Horizons magazine. We're going to kickstart that in September, October, and that's going to release next year. So I've been thinking a lot recently about sex in games. And I'm currently watching the San Francisco Porn Film Festival, which is this weekend. So I'm thinking about it very presently.
Hooray! That sounds awesome. All right, at last we have Suha. Suha, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Suha Al-Samkari. I'm Vice President of Truant Pixel. We just released last year my visual novel, Akash Path of the Five, and I am our in-house counsel. I write and I direct voiceover as well, so I do a lot of things. And I am also, along with Juja, co-vice chair of the Romance and Sexuality Special Interest Group as well with the IGDA. So, yeah.
Awesome. And as for myself, my name is Michelle Clough. I am I'm actually the chair and co-founder of the IGDA Romance and Sexuality Special Interest Group, which is basically a group for developers who are interested in sex games, romance games, etc. And on top of that, I am a game writer and narrative designer with the studio Tailspinners, which is actually an outsourcing studio that basically does work for hire for like game writing and narrative design and story services. I've been doing a lot of romantic interactive fiction for mobile. I've also sort of, done science fiction 3D shooters, and I'm actually currently I was recently working on a game called Destruction All-Stars. So I've kind of done a lot of it, but I'm particularly interested in sex scenes in games because, in fact, to the point where I spend all of my time lecturing about it at game conferences about how to harness the power of thirst for good. And so that's actually what inspired this panel. So this panel, if you haven't been on it before at one of the live packs, is the idea is that each panelist has come to this panel with a specific sex scene in mind. They're going to set the scene. They're going to describe what's going to happen. We're then going to show the video full screen. When the video is done, I will hopefully minimize it if I can figure out how. Suha. And then we will have about a 10-minute-ish interlude where the person who picked it can talk about it, say what they want to say, what was compelling about it, and then the rest of us can talk. And then when we're done with it, you, the viewers, get to actually vote on whether you thought that the sex scene was good, that you liked it, or whether it's like, you don't really like it. So be ready to vote yay and nay in chat, like you kids on Twitch do nowadays. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And yeah, these will be a mix of really things that we think are really, really great in terms of sex scenes and things that we think are not so great. So let us start off then with Suha's choice. And Suha has a very interesting choice for hers. Suha, would you like to take it away? Hang on, let me make sure this is actually working. Hello? Yes? Okay, it is now working. Okay, Suha, take it away.
I'm not going to give you too much setup here. It's really, this is a hand massage. I don't think it needs much more than that.
Ready to take the plunge, are we? So, which course will it be? Then make your way to the room in the back and wait. Cloud? This exclusive treatment is reserved for our most well-to-do patrons. First, the hand cream. A generous coating for each and every one of your richly deserving fingers. Let's start with the tips. That's it. Relax. I'm only here to help. Oh,